Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Parrot Stars podcast. My name is Alexis Highland. I am the manager at Parrot Stars, and I am joined today by Ashley and Avery, who work with me at Parrot Stars. And then behind me, I have my little blue-headed Pioneus, Jack. He is hanging out with us this morning. So Jack is a rescue Pioneus. He's in his 30s at what we believe. He's been with me since I was 14. So we've been together quite some time, and then he had some history before that. So Jack's going to be hanging out while we have our discussion today. So today we wanted to focus on household hazards and how to keep your parrot safe inside your home. So obviously, parrots are evolved to survive in the rainforest, and living in a household setting is super modified, and parrots are incredibly curious and adventurous animals, and there's a lot of potential risks in a household setting. So we just want to kind of take you through today some of the really major risks and how to set your home up to be super safe for your parrot, and how to set your parrot up for success to live safely in your house with you. A lot of what we're going to talk about today might sound like a lot of common sense, or if you've had birds for a long time, maybe you already know a lot of the topics that we're going to discuss today. And we do ask that you still give us a listen, just because we might cover something that you may have not heard before. But also, our goal is to educate both people that have had parrots for a long time and people who are just getting into parrots also. So maybe that don't have a parrot quite yet, or have recently got one. Not all breeders or stores go over household safety. And most of what we're going to talk about today are things that can be really dangerous to parrots, but are typically completely preventable with just a little bit of knowledge. So listen in. Hopefully you find today's discussion pretty interesting. Our goal is to just keep the parrots safe.
Safety first.
Absolutely. And if you haven't gotten a bird from us at Parrot Stars or know how we do things, something that I think is incredible is when someone does get a bird or adopts, we do take the time to do what we call a send home. And that's basically us sitting down with the potential adopter or customer, and we do review exactly what we're going to talk about today. So the goal, whether it's the podcast or face to face with customers, the goal is always to make sure that we're on the same page and that that parrot and those humans are set up for success and safety with their bird. So one thing I hear from a lot of folks, and something that we do cover when we review household hazards and safety, is windows and mirrors in the home. Oftentimes we want to do that out of cage time with our birds, let them get exercise. And I do know that a lot of customers have concerns. What if my bird is flying and they crash into this window, or they crash into this mirror? And of course, no one wants to see that happen or have a potential risk of injury, but that doesn't also mean that we have to necessarily draw the blinds or throw a blanket over that particular window or mirror. When we do have our birds out, there are ways to be able to enjoy that sunlight or have your mirror and still do that out of cage time safely with your bird. So usually what we recommend is one of two things or both, physically showing your bird that there is a barrier there. So if they're able to step up and they're on your hand, or maybe they're in their carrier or you roll the cage near that surface, tapping on it and showing them that there is in fact a barrier can be very useful. Because once they do make that connection, and it might have to be more than once, but when they do make that connection, it just makes it easier for them to fly and turn rather than flying straight at it. Another thing that is really, really useful is using painter's tape. So I know some people like to do the window decals, but it can often leave, residue behind, or it might just not be the look you're going for in your home. The painter's tape is really nice because you put it on an angle across that surface, and then over time, peel away one strip, leave the rest, and you continue to do that until the bird learns that the barrier is there. What's nice about the painter's tape is it's not going to leave sticky residue on the windows. It doesn't have to be permanent. And it's just a really great contrast and way to show the bird, hey, there is a physical barrier here. And you'll be surprised at how quick your bird does learn. So don't feel like you have to go through a whole ordeal of closing the shades, putting something over a mirror. Simply taking that time to teach them that this is there can really prevent collisions into those types of surfaces.
Yeah, and I think again, we're going to have a discussion in the future about the pros and cons of clipping and or not clipping. At Parrot Stars, we are strong advocates for keeping parrots fully flighted. And a lot of feedback we get when we're talking about this element of our household safety is, well, that's why I've been told to clip my bird's wings, or that's why I've always clipped my bird's wings in the past, is to prevent the injuries that could happen when a bird hits a glass mirror or window. In our experience, and this is not a end all be all, every single bird that's fully flighted is safe from getting injured. I know there's exceptions to the rule, but what we really try to coach people on is if a baby has the opportunity to fully fledge properly in a large enough space and understands windows from a very early age, a lot of times they understand the concepts of that glass barrier really, really early. And the other advantage to having them be fully flighted is that their flight is much more agile and skilled. So they are able to slow down, to turn, to stop really abruptly. So a lot of times they can kind of pivot right before they might crash. Whereas a clipped bird isn't always going to have that same ability to be super agile or to understand how to slow down or stop. And clipbirds also may not be accustomed to flight inside their house. They might be a little bit more sedentary. So if they get startled off their cage or perch or your hand, again, they're not going to have the same confidence to kind of take that lap around the room and return to a safe spot, whereas typically a fully flighted parrot might. So, again, just to kind of highlight that there is a little, the reason we talk about keeping them fully flighted is because we are centering it around safety, but having them fully flighted is going to help prevent some of the potential risks, despite kind of what has always been the philosophy of clipped birds don't injure themselves. It's not necessarily true.
Yeah, because one of the reasons we do kind of recommend definitely that we keep the birds fully flighted, we also recommend that when you do get home with a new bird, or if you kind of want to do a reset, with your bird you already have, is to keep it in its home cage for as long as you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your bird gets, put into a brand new environment, there's a lot of brand new things, and if you let it out prematurely, that's where you could get that big flightiness and the chase,
Yeah,
and it's not familiar with the room it's in, and it might be a big room, so that if your bird picks up speed, and then we could have some
totally.
damage there. So it's just important to be proactive. So about that.
Yeah, and letting them get it acclimated to the space, like you said, is
Yeah.
it's so important because when it can be overstimulating, they might take flight more erratically
Yeah.
than they would if they have had that time to settle in, like you were
Yeah,
describing. They get to take in the room, they have that mental map of what everything looks like, and they can kind of think more when they are going out to fly as opposed to everything being brand new. They might just go right into that fight or flight mode and not necessarily have time to really, determine where they're going to go in the room. It might just be a beeline for whatever.
Right. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think to touch on that point a little bit further, there is an advantage to doing some of that positive reinforcement training while the parrot is still inside the cage,
Oh
so
yeah.
that when we start having that out of cage time, the parrot's going to feel a sense of confidence and trust in you. And again, is going to be less likely to flee you when it's out of its cage. So, keeping it in that cage is going to be advantageous not only for your relationship, but also to prevent some of the startled flight that can occur when a bird just enters a new home.
Yeah, and there are things too in the home that are very unique to home living that they might not come in contact with in the wild. Ceiling fans are a big one, and unfortunately some parrots, when the ceiling fan is on and they get frightened, they end up kind of flying right at it, which
Mm-hmm.
is obviously a very big hazard for them. And just a very simple tip is simply turning that ceiling fan off before we take the bird out. It's not the actual fan. It seems like it's that fast motion that kind of scares them. So something as simple as I'm just going to turn my ceiling fan off before I let the bird out can prevent some of that erratic flight or the potential collision with those moving blades.
Yeah. I know a lot of times with the um, ceiling fans and the household air circulation
Yeah.
devices, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of times, like apartments, especially, but older homes will have like radiators on the
Mm-hmm.
floor. So it's just important to make sure that your birds shouldn't be really on the floor that often, but make sure those radiators are not blazing hot where your
Mm-hmm.
bird likes to kind of scrounge around in the dark places and you can't see, and the last thing you want is some hurt toes or getting caught in those little holes and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
That actually reminds me of another big one. For me, I don't usually recommend having the parrot in the kitchen, especially when we're cooking. That's a personal boundary for sanitation purposes. But when we're talking about safety, something I always drive home with folks is our stovetops. So if we have our bird with us when we're cooking dinner and we turn off that stovetop, we know it's still hot. The bird does not. And if your bird tries to go and perch on something like that, or for boiling water, these are things, again, it might sound like common sense, but in the moment, we might not be thinking about it. And that could be very serious, potentially life-threatening
Yeah.
hazards there.
I think we got a call the other day about, and this is terrible. The bird's fine though.
Good.
But somebody was cooking and their bird like fell in the frying pan. I don't know if you heard about that,
Yeah.
but that's crazy.
I think it
It's just
happens
something. It could be a mistake.
often. Yeah.
Yeah, totally
But
a innocent mistake, but it's
Yeah.
something you got to be.
yeah, and I think that comes from like getting a little bit of that false sense of security that when your parrot's out, it's going to kind of like follow the same routine every single time. It's just that one off situation where something goes awry or the parrot slips or it's trying to do an attention seeking behavior and it doesn't know that that behavior is going to potentially put it at risk. So by really thinking about what you're doing before you do it and making sure, I mean, the recommendation that we have is just plain and simple. If you're cooking, the parrot should be in its cage, period. I mean, I hate to be so firm and direct about it, or I'm not trying to tell people what to do necessarily, but it's just such a major risk. And we unfortunately get those calls quite often. And I see reports of it quite often where a lot of accidents happen in the kitchen while people are cooking. And I think something I also hear as well, that's a time when I can bond with my parrot because maybe you work all day and you come home and you have to fix dinner and this is the parrot's quote unquote out of cage time with you. And in that circumstance, I would maybe consider thinking about it in terms of quality of time versus quantity of time. For that short time that you are making dinner, it's going to be safe for the bird to be locked in its cage where it's safe and the environment's controlled. But then as soon as you're done cooking and all of those hot things are put away and there's no more risk, then take your parrot out and engage with it. And I think that engaging experience for your parrot is going to be much more gratifying to them than what is going to be kind of like a so-so engagement where you're kind of like acknowledging them, but you're also focusing on making dinner. So don't feel that like guilt that if you've worked all day and now you're coming home and making dinner that your parrot's not getting that engagement. Just look at it in terms of quality of time versus quantity of time. It's still in your best interest and especially your parrot's best interest to have them in a safe position when you're doing things that can be potentially risky to them.
I like that you mentioned specifically being in the cage during that. I personally follow that recommendation and provide that to the folks I do work with. But it made me even think just now, Jack is sitting on a tree stand behind you, and he might stay there perfectly. But
Right.
if you're cooking dinner and something startles him and he flies to you for safety,
Yep.
again, there's that risk. While chances are 9 times out of 10, he might just stay right there. But it's the things we can't always plan for. So I do like that you mentioned the cage because we might just think, oh, my bird's in the other room on their play stand, their tree stand. But if something does scare them and we're that form of
Yeah.
safety, they might come seek that out and then be putting themselves in harm's way. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
There are a lot of spooky sounds in the kitchen,
Yes.
especially for
Yes.
like new birds that haven't experienced too much in a household setting. So you just need to keep that in mind, especially if you're looking for ways of bonding and trying to figure out when time you can set aside. It's probably best not to do it during cook time.
Yeah, and bonding with them using parrot specific products is going to be better than others. And I saw a very cute video recently that kind of irked me. It was someone letting their cockatoo play with their curling iron and it was not plugged in.
Yikes.
It was just like on the ground and it was this adorable sulfur like picking it up and like kind of mirroring what the human did, which cool, that's adorable for a video, but now that the parrot has engaged with that item, it might continue to think that that's okay to do so, and it's not going to know when it's plugged in and when it's hot or not. So, as like air quotes adorable as the video was, allowing the birds to interact with human items, even if they're quote unquote safe in that moment, can be risky down the line because the parrot is going to learn, oh, it's appropriate for me to engage with this. So things
Yeah.
like that.
Definitely.
It definitely irked me a little bit, and I know that wasn't the intention of the person who posted it. They might not have even thought of it, but definitely a potential risk. Chewing on zippers, same thing. I know a lot of people let their birds chew on hoodie zippers, and they're like, I don't mind. But if that zipper isn't made with a good quality metal and it's starting to chip, again, our bird is engaging with something that it thinks is safe because it's been allowed to do so. So
Mhm.
just
Shiny
things to be,
thing.
yes, shiny things
It's
to
a
be
whole
mindful
rabbit
of.
hole with household products, I
Yes.
suppose. But like knives out in the kitchen, anything. Going back, well, not to dwell on the kitchen too much, but obviously they're sharp, and parrots love getting their feet on little shiny things like the
Yeah.
bells in their cage or stainless steel toys, and then it's the same to them.
Right.
They don't know the difference.
I think what's really important to highlight for not only adult birds, but particularly young birds that are just coming to a new home. I'm not trying to compare bringing home a human baby to bringing home a baby parrot, but I mean, everyone will agree that parrots have an incredibly high level of intelligence and intense curiosity. So, the same precautions you'd make for a baby that's just learning to walk or crawl, there's so many dangerous things in a household for a young baby. And of course, we're going to take all of those precautions and you're going to be on high alert the entire time with a human. And parrots, yes, maybe are going to have a little bit more wherewithal and ability to kind of think through situations, but the curiosity is still there. So,
Yeah.
keeping cabinets closed is a really important thing. Making sure they can't fall into a trash can. I mean, all the things that could be potentially risky for a young kid, picking up the knives, like you just mentioned, the cords, the electronic
Yeah.
things, outlets. I mean, all of the things that a parrot might think is something that it can play with can be potentially really hazardous. And again, what we're going to highlight here is like quality of time versus quantity of time. When your parrot is outside of its enclosure, its cage, wherever you keep it secure while you're not home, you have to keep your eyes on it. You really should be an active participant in what your parrot is doing when it's outside of its cage. And you're going to limit a lot of really potentially dangerous things in the household. So, like Avery said, I mean, we really shouldn't be letting them walk around on the floor, but it happens. But if you're there and you're supervising the bird's playtime, you should be able to go over and pick it up pretty immediately. And then if you do have to take a phone call or do something on the computer, or you're in the middle of a conversation with your family and you're not able to kind of actively participate in what your parrot's doing, maybe take that 5 to 10 minutes, put the bird back in its cage, give it a little reward. And then once you're done doing whatever you needed to do, then engage with your parrot again. Because it's, again, something where maybe if you're distracted and you're doing something else, your parrot is going to do that attention seeking behavior that might get it into a pickle.
They're like little kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to tie together the things that we've been talking about, and there's still a couple more things that we want to cover before we finish this episode with nonstick cookware and cleaning supplies that are two really risky things to have in the house with the bird. To kind of tie together this theme of our conversation, all of these potential risks have a lot to do with the time that the parrot is outside of its cage. And a really strong recommendation that I can give to everybody listening is that have a little mental checklist before you open your parrot's cage door. A really important and very useful strategy is to have like a little group chat on your phone with your family that you can shoot a quick text message to all the family members. Hey, I'm letting the parrot out. Because maybe you're being a really conscientious bird owner and you've let it out of its cage and you're engaging with it fully, but maybe somebody started a pot of boiling water without you knowing it. Or maybe somebody's opened the patio door and left it open and you didn't realize.
Yeah.
Or the toilet seat's open or the ceiling fan is on. All of those things that could be risky maybe are out of your control and you took all of your precautions, but somebody else in the house didn't know that the bird was out. And now we have an accident on our hands. So really communicating fully, either by shouting out to the whole household, like, hey, I'm letting the bird out, which is often what my husband and I do. Like, we're always in communication, especially because we have our sliding glass door really close to where we have our parrot cages. And that's the same door that we use to let our dogs in and out. So we have to have like a complete and full awareness of where our parrots are, because we can't take any risks that somebody didn't know one of them was out and then the door opens and there they go. But then also we're cooking and we're doing things in the house where if he's in and out of the garage door constantly and not knowing that the bird might follow behind him, I mean, we've got to really stay in communication. So it's a tool that we use that works really, really well, but it's just the two of us. So you could imagine in a family setting where you're working with multiple family members, just that simple text message or that shout out, hey, the bird's coming out of his cage, is going to really limit a lot of the potential risks that a parrot could be exposed to.
Definitely. There's easy ways to go about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our behind the scenes producer, Julian, just asked a very good question. So if he asked, like, can you teach the parrot like safe zones in the house? I think that's a topic that we can really devote a lot of time to in a future episode, but it is something that's important to bring up in this household safety episode, I think, because you can teach and set your parrot up to understand boundaries within the home. And you can teach them to station and to really understand that it really shouldn't fly off of its tree stand or its cage unless you're asking it to. And it's a very intentional call to your hand. So there are ways that you can kind of station your parrot to not kind of have just this haphazard exploration throughout the entire house. And that's something that we're going to encourage you to do from basically day one if you're just starting with your companion parrot. But I don't want people to feel discouraged if they already have a companion parrot, that they feel maybe that they don't have a lot of control over where it goes and what it does. As soon as they let it out of the cage, it's just like a free for all. And maybe that's something that you allow to happen. And we're not trying to pass judgment. We're not, again, trying to tell you right from wrong. It's just there are going to be a ton of advantages to teaching your bird to station, to creating those boundaries from a very early age, but it's never too late. You can always teach an old dog new tricks. It's never too late to kind of restructure some of those boundaries if you've had your parrot for a long time.
I think that was a phenomenal question, and definitely we can dedicate a ton more time, probably even a whole episode, to dive into that type of training with them. I do know you mentioned the nonstick cookware and cleaning supplies, which is a really, really big one for keeping our parrots safe.
Yes.
Because it will impact them regardless of where they are in the home when we're using these things. So, for those of you who don't know too much about parrot anatomy necessarily, birds in general have really efficient respiratory systems. What they don't have, though, is the filtering mechanisms that humans or many other mammals have. So, for them, when they are breathing in, everything goes directly into the bloodstream. So, there's not anything that's filtering out chemicals or potential hazards the way it does for us, which is why they're so sensitive to certain cleaning supplies, aerosols in general, and nonstick cookware. So that unfortunate saying about a canary in a coal mine does have truth to it, and was a way back when that miners would actually test whether or not the air quality was safe for the humans down there by having
That just gave me goosebumps.
songbirds.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and because was it the methane? I'm not sure what gas it was. Regardless, they did use them to help indicate how safe the air was. Thankfully, no one does that anymore, but we all are familiar with that saying. So if we can kind of remember that, it'll help us remember how sensitive the birds can be. So when we are picking out cleaning supplies, we don't recommend using aerosols, which is anything you can spray really around them, because those particulates are up in the air and can be potentially hazardous as they breathe that in. I know at the store when we do have to disinfect, because you have to disinfect every now and then, we either use the white vinegar or really hot soapy water in Dawn. Anytime we have to use something for disinfecting, if we can do it with a wipe on that surface, so much safer than using an aerosol. But more often than not, we don't even need to rely on that.
Yeah, we do spend a lot of time on this with all of our, especially brand new bird owners, and so because we care a lot about these type of things, because we get a lot of calls, unfortunately, about mysterious health issues that might be a result of these sort of cleaning supplies that people didn't know about. But another thing about the cleaning supplies and the whole aerosols and things going into the air would be like your candles and your smell good things that you plug into
Mm-hmm.
the wall. That could be very, very irritable to your parrot's health. So it's important to be cautious of that. I know they make like parrot safe and is it soy or
Yeah.
coconut or is that
Yeah.
even an option?
It's usually like the paraffin wax candles, the ones that
Okay.
are highly processed and have a lot of chemicals added to the candles themselves.
Right.
It's really worthwhile that you do your own research. There are brands of candles out there that are theoretically safe, but a vast majority of them are not. So I'm going to recommend fully that people just avoid the use of candles in the house. There are bird safe potpourris that can be made and used with all natural ingredients that you know are completely bird safe. So there are options that if you want a specific fragrance in the house, you can still achieve it in a way that's really, really bird safe. But most mainstream products are going to be really, really dangerous. The reason that people kind of struggle when they hear this is that they're like, well, like my bird isn't in the bathroom or my bird isn't in the kitchen, so I can use those products not around the bird and I'm sure it'll be fine. And this is something that I get really, really firm with and I take very, very seriously because, as Avery mentioned, like the volume of calls that we get from people whose birds have dropped dead in their cages immediately after or during the use of cleaning supplies, regardless of where those cleaning supplies were used in the house, like it's ridiculous how many birds die from the use of chemicals and cleaners in the household. And again, we're not trying to make people feel bad if you've experienced this in the past or this has happened to you. It's not meant to be like, oh my gosh, you're a terrible bird person or you're a terrible bird owner. But it was preventable. And like, again, I'm not trying to use examples, but I feel like that's the best way to kind of communicate. We had a family, like the nicest family. They were wonderful. Took all of the advice that we gave them. We're very serious bird owners. We had the conversation about the cleaning supplies. Okay. They were very adamant. They had a cleaning lady that came and they had communicated to her like all natural cleaning supplies. So vinegar and water, dish soap and water. If you have to disinfect something, a little bit of bleach and water. The lady was like totally on board for it. No problem. Can totally do that. The bird was up in the son's bedroom, and this was it was a large house. Like we talked extensively after the bird died, and to kind of evaluate what transpired. And even though the bird was up in the son's bedroom with the door closed, the cleaning lady came through and sprayed the entire lower level, like all the seating surfaces, the couches and the chairs with Febreze. And have nothing wrong with Febreze as a company, but it literally says on Febrez's label, not for use around birds. It is toxic to birds. And the bird died within an hour of them spraying the Febreze. So, and this was in a different level of the house, in a large house, and it was just a couch and a couple chairs that this person sprayed. I mean, it wasn't like they just fumigated the home. Like that little bit of use of that toxic chemical was enough to kill the bird. So it's not something that we're like trying to tell people how to live. It is serious stuff and it will kill the bird. It's not like a situation where it's optional or you can take the risk.
Yeah.
And again, kind of the same concept as the free flight thing, like where maybe somebody has had a bird in their house already and they have been using toxic chemicals or the Febreze or the candles and their bird hasn't died. It's just a matter of time, unfortunately. It's not something that you can kind of get away with and hope for the best.
Yeah.
It might just take that one instance where it was enough to take the bird out. And the tricky thing about this part is the way that the toxic cleaning supplies or chemicals or the nonstick cookware, which we'll talk about a little bit more here in a second, the way they affect the bird's body is that like the bird will look completely fine and then simply drop dead. Like there's no warning sign.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, because it's essentially blood poisoning, they literally just, it toxifies their whole body. There's almost no vet intervention that can be done once it's happened. So, again, not to be all dark and scary, but it's so preventable. Like I have a house with 4 dogs that like are gross and hairy and I have to clean up with after them like you wouldn't believe. Same thing, I have 4 birds in the house that I'm constantly cleaning up after. And we survive fully on vinegar and dish soap. Those are the only cleaning supplies we have in the house, other than we do have bleach so that if I have to clean the bathroom or something, I can make us a very diluted bleach water solution to disinfect the surfaces that really need to be disinfected after they're washed with the dish soap and water. But even then, with bleach, you still have to use a lot of caution, and it's like significantly diluted so that we're not putting the birds at risk. And we survive. We don't use all the fancy window cleaners or carpet cleaners or floor cleaners. We just everything. I mean, vinegar is like the greatest thing on this planet, I think. Like white vinegar solves all my problems. We do the windows, the floors, the carpets. I know vinegar has an intense smell in the beginning, but we use it as a deodorizer for the dog beds and for our couches that the dogs are allowed to sit on. And it works. I mean, hopefully I'm not totally desensitized. You guys can tell me. You're at my house right now. If my house had like an epically bad dog smell, you could tell me, but I don't think it does. So anyway, I think I'm real passionate about this because unfortunately I've had to have a lot of conversations with people after their birds have died. And I hate when I have to say like, okay, like it was the cleaning supplies and the guilt that's felt knowing that it was something preventable. It's just, I want to communicate it as clearly as I can to as many people as I can so people don't have to experience it because it is horrible when it happens.
I think one more thing about that before we do move on to the nonstick is it doesn't matter the species.
Yeah.
You know, especially from your little parrotlets to your hyacinth macaws. It's all the same. So no matter what bird, you know, the bigger it is doesn't mean that it does have that, you know, more what's the word for immunity to the chemicals and stuff. So just be cautious all the time.
Yeah, it's just not worth the risk. It's something that I'm very passionate about too, and do spend a good amount of time talking to customers on, and even did so myself before I brought my own bird home. But that nonstick cookware is a really big one. We mentioned the cleaning supplies, scented candles, because those are common in the household. Same thing with the nonstick cookware, very common in the home. And I get the question a lot of, but my bird is upstairs, my bird is downstairs, I open the windows, like it's ventilated. Does not matter. And I am not trying to be super doom and gloom. And again, you might have had instances where it was okay, but for the most part, it's going to travel, those fumes will travel through the ventilation system. And it's not something that we can smell or detect. And usually I explain this to folks with, we've all used those nonstick cookware where our food does come off easily, but over time it starts to stick and gets harder and harder to get off. That is simply because the coating, that nonstick coating, has already started to leach off into our food and into the air. We have a ton of filtering mechanisms in our lungs, so it might not impact us, at least not right away. But that is a great way. I think we've all experienced that, and that is evidence of those fumes just escaping from that cookware. And like you said, usually the bird seems okay, and then they find them the next morning or they drop later. If you've read our household hazards and safety, Dr. Sakis did a wonderful, very in-depth writing about all of this information. And in his experience, he said that, even if it doesn't get the bird right away, sometimes they end up just gasping on the bottom of their cage. And again, the intention here isn't to make people feel bad or scare them. I mean, maybe a little bit of scare, just because I would rather have you get scared from what I'm sharing with you than experience it yourself. Because more often than not, it is not people intentionally trying to hurt their birds. It is good people who love their birds, who work very hard and just might simply not have this information until after something happens.
Oh, yeah. And the pans, I think it can be found in air fryers and things like that, and self-cleaning ovens. A customer came into the store and said that, they don't have any pans. They ensured their oven didn't contain this, but they needed an air fryer. because that's how which is totally fine. But she told me that she takes it outside every
Interesting, yeah.
time. So
I
she
love
says she
it,
does it in the
yeah.
dead of winter too.
Oh,
So
wow.
if you
Dedication.
gotta, air fry those chicken nuggets, just maybe go outside in the patio and then bring them back in.
Or do a little research and just look at the materials
Well,
it's
that's
made of
true.
too.
Before you do
Yeah.
buy one,
Yeah. To clarify a little bit more, when we're talking about the nonstick cookware, that is the applied PTFE chemical that is put on pots and pans. So there is a lot of information on it. We'll put it in the show notes too, exactly what that chemical is, so you can research it. Nonstick is a controversial topic. I'm not going to be on my high horse about it at all as to whether or not it's safe for humans. That's something that somebody's going to have to decide
Yeah.
on their own. But companies have gotten pretty savvy at making nonstick cookware disguised. I mean, they kind of hide that chemical name. They've relabeled it nonstick, but the actual chemical application is what's toxic to the birds. So it is in a lot of appliances, not just your pots and pans. So as Avery mentioned, the air fryers very commonly have it. And it's not just like the surfaces that are directly in contact with the parts that touch the food. A lot of the interior heating mechanisms also have nonstick elements to them in case something spills or they have to ever take it apart and clean it. They put all that nonstick chemical inside the appliances. So griddles, electric griddles, waffle irons, the air fryers. I mean, there's so many toaster ovens can all have nonstick on them. So again, not to tell people how to live their life, but I'm telling you, if you have the option to do it outside of the house, you have to. And with the pots and pans, it's just a non-negotiable, guys. You have to completely eliminate them from your house. When I do send homes, I'm pretty firm with people because maybe they have their one exception, like their one nonstick that they use for eggs, and they're going to promise to be very cautious and careful that they're not going to let the pan overheat. They're going to take really good care of it. But again, a lot of people live with multiple members in their household. Maybe one person is really cautious, but then it takes that one instance of leaving the burner on, letting the pan overheat. And as soon as that pan overheats, and it's not a lot, like it's literally medium heat or above.
Yeah.
And think about how many times you go over that like 5 dial on your burners. Like as soon as you exceed medium heat, the chemical starts breaking down and going airborne. You just have to eliminate them from their house because nobody is perfect and nobody can have complete control of how those pots and pans are used. So as an alternative, stainless steel pots and pans work incredibly well. So, and there's going to be no applied nonstick coating. But again, do your research before you buy your pots and pans. Make sure that they haven't snuck it in there. Cast iron, another really great option. So, like when we eat eggs all the time, and cast iron pots and pans should not have a nonstick coating. Again, do your research, but you kind of like season a cast iron pan to have like natural nonstick elements that aren't going to be a chemical that's been applied. It's just the natural oil and butters that kind of seep into the cast iron. Makes it way easier for cooking eggs or things that are typically really sticky and really get caked on your pots and pans. Ceramic and aluminum, same rules apply. The actual core, the ceramic and aluminum core that the pan is made out of is safe, but it's the applied nonstick coating that you have to be careful of.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we get the highest number of my parrot has just died phone calls, like the day after Thanksgiving, the day after Christmas, the day after Easter, days that are heavy cooking days in America. I mean, those are days that are notorious for cooking to be happening all day long.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm highlighting that is maybe you've taken a ton of precautions to make your house and your cooking supplies incredibly safe. But around the holidays, we tend to put our guard down. Maybe people are bringing over their own pots and pans. If we're having a party or we're having people over, they plug something in or they're using a pan that they brought with them. And then all of a sudden, an accident has occurred. And now the parrot's not with us because of, again, something totally preventable and avoidable. So important. We can't stress enough the importance of eliminating them from the house. I mean, just take the cleaning supplies and the nonstick out of the house completely. It's just, you have to. And then I just want to really touch on a little bit of the science behind the concept of your bird is upstairs, but you're cooking downstairs. So the particles, the chemicals in cleaning supplies and the nonstick that go up into the air, they ride on air molecules. And the science behind gaseous things is that a gas is always going to expand to the full extent of its container. So when you think of it in terms of your house being the container, those chemicals will travel to the farthest depths of your attic, of your basement, of your crawl space. They will go to every single corner of the house and in a pretty decent concentration too. So they're expanding all at the same rate. They're going to be traveling to the bedrooms, to the basement. And even with doors and windows open and having a fan turned on, you still are going to have those chemicals travel to the entire interior space of the house. So there isn't safety in just opening the window or venting it out or turning the ceiling fan on to kind of circulate the air better. It's still going to be dangerous regardless of where your parrot is in the house.
I really like how you explain that too, because even myself, knowing this, being aware of it, talking about it with folks, the way you explained it just now, I could literally picture what you were saying. Hopefully everyone listening could too. And it was a great way to present this topic and help even someone who's aware of this understand it a little bit better and help me to maybe take more precautions in my own home, even though I feel like I am doing a really good job as it is. So I just want to say I like the way you explained that. That was very, very well put. And as you know, for me, before I brought my bird home, I had to delay it a couple times because I was literally replacing my pots and pans. And I did get cast iron. Thankfully, did my research because I accidentally got one that had some of that nonstick coating in there. Had to return it, all of this stuff. But I couldn't be happier with the changes I made. And it gives me that peace of mind that my bird is safe when I'm making my meals. And
Yep.
I was grateful that I did have resources around me, experienced individuals to, give me some feedback or recommendations, and just knowing and having that in my mind that to the best of my ability, I'm creating a safe environment for my bird. That peace of mind is priceless, honestly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cast iron is cool to cook with anyway.
It is pretty fun. I'm not going to
It makes
lie.
you feel really fancy.
Yes, definitely. But yeah, I think that those are important things. And then you did mention being mindful of the wear and tear on our pans. I know that there are some folks who like to use like a ceramic nonstick, I think, and it is functional for them because that coating is beneath the ceramic, I believe. The risk being if it chips and cracks, we don't have that buffer or barrier. So just being very, very mindful of what is the most safe option or things that are going to need constant monitoring.
Yep.
Well, I think there's still more that could be said about household safety. I mean, this is just like the things that we kind of agreed upon were like the biggest, most pressing things that are immediately risks when you first bring a bird home or when you have a bird, like the things that can cause unexpected death most easily. So there are a lot of other elements to household safety that we can continue to talk about in future episodes. As always, if any of the listeners have questions or comments or things that they want us to discuss or go into a little bit more detail about, we're more than happy to kind of take some suggestions about how to guide these discussions so that they're functional for our listeners, and hopefully you guys are learning something as we go through. So as always, the best way to support this podcast is by liking, sharing, commenting the individual episodes, but then also rating and reviewing the podcast itself is really going to help us. The better the reviews, the better. So I'm not trying to tell you how to rate or review the podcast, but the more that we get ratings and reviews, the more visibility our podcast has, and the more that we can kind of continue to put efforts toward producing this content for you guys. So, all right. Well, thank you all for participating. And
as always, everybody, be kind to your parrot. And I'll be kind to you.
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you.